They say the view from the top is great, but when the biggest clubs in the league are throwing away performances, showing broken mentalities, they're really just looking through a glass ceiling. Welcome back to Joeys Vantage for my reaction to Match Week 22 key matches. Let's get into it. Let's start with the biggest game of the week. It was Manchester United versus Man City in the Manchester Derby. What a game, I think, for both clubs. They'd come in terms of EPL results, a lot of draws, I think valuable points that were lost in previous games that they really wanted to make up for. And look, Carrick, a new manager, a new man in town, what was he going to, give the players? What philosophy was he going to run? And I think from the very get-go, it was evident that he put his players in the positions that they were familiar with, and Manchester United looked really good from the very get-go. And we really have to start with Luigi Donnarumma. What a goalkeeper, what a shot stopper. He made some critical saves in that first half. Ahmad got on the end of one. Then Casemiro should have scored. And I think, look, the deficit could have been huge in that first half alone if it wasn't for his presence and ability to just make those critical, saves when a depleted backline is already under, scrutiny and under so much pressure. And then you've got to look and move on to Rodri in that midfield. Look, he's such a great player, but I think at times Man City got overrun by Bruno, just, directing traffic, putting through balls through to, Ahmad and Buemo. And I think when he's in that roaming role, that 10, he's got so much time and so much space to operate. He looks so dangerous. And then the likes of Mainu next to him and Casemiro, he's just so good with his feet in his first touch. It's like as soon as he receives a ball, he's got his first touch just to, go left or right is so, I think, critical as a midfielder in terms of, shaking up the defensive plays. They don't know which way to go. And I think then Casa, he was just brutal in his defensive actions. A few through balls to Dorgu looked really good. And I think that they look so solid because of, I think, of Man City's lack of other defensive options in that midfield. They had the likes of Foden, Cherky, Bernardo, not really physical players that can get to the likes of other midfielders and really, make him hurt in that sense. And then we've got to talk about that second half. I think Manchester United continue to just display so much dominance and so much power. I think they have got that, especially when they've got those wingers running, they're just energy levels on that counter-attack. And look, it led to that Bryan Mbeumo goal from that Bruno Fernandes pass. And what a way to, come back into the team and really show your class. And then Dorgu, about 10 minutes later, got that cross from Cunha, and you thought, oh my God, this is what everyone's been screaming out for. Plays in their right position. Look, Ruben had great attitude and I think mentality. I think that players sometimes they just need to be put in their positions that they're, not used to, but also just know how to play at a certain position at the very highest level. And look, for Manchester United, is this something they can carry on with? And really just, because past weeks they weren't losing. They were getting, results. They should have beat Burnley. They really, I think, were unlucky not to win that game. And for Man City, look, they've got Gahey coming in now at that centre half, but they're still missing that depth at centre half. So look, who knows where they're going to go from now on. And then we move on to Arsenal versus Forest. And look, this was always going to be a scrap. This was going to be back to basics for Forest. I think that, look, under Dyche, they've been a lot better, since the removal of Ange Postecoglou. And look, considering previous results, I think they really wanted to at least get a point. They could always get a point, like, defensively since their introduction back of Sells. I think that he had something to really show for. And look, Arsenal, they just, couldn't convert their chances. And look, for a club that, could have been 9 points ahead and points to Man City had been dropped, you thought, look, this was a chance to extend that lead. But no, they weren't able to convert. They didn't show that conviction like really champions do. And look, for them, they hesitated. They, see a trophy in the distance and they couldn't, grab the points. And then we moved on to Villa versus Everton, and Villa Park was supposed to be the fortress. It was the place where Villa had been dominating, especially over the last couple of months. And then, look, in terms of versing Everton, they'd been so strong there, 11 games in a row. Now, not the case. Everton went there without really some of their most important players. You still had NDIA still to come, Gahey to come. You didn't have Keane. And you had players in there step up and really do a job. You had the likes of Pickford have a man of the match performance. Was it 5 saves, 6 saves? He was brilliant. You had that save on Rodgers that you thought it was a surefire goal. And look, the thing is, when you've got, players out, you've got to step up. And I think that for Villa, they have, that depth. You have Tielemans, you have McGinn, who's been there for so long. Really experienced players that should have got more out of it. And now they've also dropped points. And, if they got the win, could be a 4-point from the top. Well, that's a wrap up for match week 22 key matches. And I think, look, the ceiling is about to smash. But some teams, I think, look, they're just not getting the most about their strikers, their forwards. See Arsenal, Gyökeres still not, producing what we think. I think Haaland, I forgot to mention, but, got pocketed by Martinez. He played great for them. I think he was so sturdy. Also Maguire, so sturdy in the back line, showing, people they are very good defenders. And I think, look, and also for Villa, on such a roll, these are the games you've got to convert when, some of the most important players for teams aren't there. As always, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Joeys Vantage. Be on the lookout for next week as we look at match week 23.